Hi, it's Robert from SuperGuide. We've got a great explainer now on SMSF trustees. Garth McNally covers all the important considerations so you can have more trust in your trust deed. SuperGuide members have access to an extended version of this guide, including what to consider with trust deed updates and some tips that could save you hundreds of dollars. We hope you find this video useful, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can be notified when we next release a video. Please remember that this guide is general information only and not personal advice or legal advice. Laws can also differ between states and territories. We are not legal professionals, and legal advice should be obtained prior to acting on anything covered in this guide.
When you read about self-managed super funds, you usually see some reference or important note to refer to the fund's trustee for guidance around what the trustees can do, guidance around how they need to do it. For instance, before we admit a new member to a self-managed fund, we need to review the trustee to see who can become a member of the fund and the process required to accept that new member into the SMSF. So having a good understanding of the ins and outs of an SMSF trustee is therefore a really important issue for both existing and prospective SMSF trustees and members. Keep in mind that an SMSF is really a trust, a legal structure where assets are held by the fund trustees for the benefit of the members, the members of the fund or their dependents, collectively referred to as the beneficiaries. So in a self-managed super fund, the fund's assets represent the retirement savings of the fund members and can only be used when they retire, or when a member meets one of the specified events that allow access to their benefits, what we refer to as the conditions of release. Each SMSF has its own rule book, referred to as the trustee, and this sets out the rules that are specific to that self-managed super fund. So essentially what the trustees are allowed to do and how they need to do it. These rules are written in a way so they align with the superannuation regulations and legislation, but the rules apply to each SMSF as each trustee is specific to each fund. Think of it this way. We have super legislation and regulations that set out the specific laws and what trustees must not do. And then we have the SMSF trustee that sets out what trustees are allowed to do and how they need to do it. It's therefore important that SMSF trustees' decisions are not only made in accordance with the legislation and the regulations, but are also in line with the specific fund rules set out in the relevant trustee. So what to look for in a trustee, what's important? This will, of course, depend on the personal position of the fund members, but there are some important areas where we can draw your attention to look at, to make sure that the trustee is relevant to your particular position. Okay, so the first issue we need to look at is around the trustee voting and fund control. We need to look at what the fund-specific voting rules are. Now, there's really two ways that this is managed within the wording of a trustee. The first one is around member balances, so what we call a proportionate voting method. What that means is the higher balance members get more votes. They get more say in the running of the fund. The lower balance members, of course, would get a lesser say in the running of the fund. The alternate method is per member. Essentially, each member has a say in the running of the fund. So it's a per member, per vote approach. Now, what we need to think about is what's relevant for your position. Where you've got older members with more significant balances, you may have the view that they should have more say in the voting of the fund, more say in the control of the fund. Particularly if you've got, say, mum and dad with 4 kids. In a 6-member fund, you've got 4 kids with 4 votes versus mum and dad who might hold the lion's share of the fund's balance. So when it comes to sort of voting powers, we need to weigh up what's right. Well, you need to weigh up what's right for your particular position. What's important is to look at the actual wording of the trustee, and what I can give you here is some specific wording from 2 separate trustees. The first one says that each trustee will have 1 vote. A simple majority of votes will be determined on all issues at the meeting. Each member shall then appoint a chairperson who has their own vote. So not only do we need to think about the voting powers per member or per balance, we also need to think about who might be the chairperson appointed when a vote is being carried out, because that chairperson would usually have a separate additional vote for themselves. Alternative wording might be that the votes of the trustees are based on the dollar value of each member's balance. So what I want to encourage you to do is look at the specific voting rules that are set out in your trust deed. If they're appropriate, run with that. If not, you could consider updating your trust deed, which we'll have a look at a bit later on. The next major consideration I'd suggest you look at is the wording around, do all trustees have to be members? Now, we're all aware that the super rules require trustees to be members and vice versa, but there are some exceptions which apply. For instance, when members get older, they may lose capacity, and when they lose capacity, the SIS rules, the super rules, are written in a way where we could appoint somebody else to act as a trustee for us. And it's usually our legal personal representative. In that case, we remain a member, but our legal personal representative takes on that trustee role. If you've got wording in trustee that says all trustees must be members, it's then sort of forcing on the LPR acting as trustee for them to become a member. So again, we're looking at deed-specific issues in certain situations. The first one there being capacity, and the same thing being, for instance, if a member moved overseas, and again, their legal personal representative was going to act for them. Does your trust deed wording force that LPR to also become a member? Just something to think about. You wouldn't want that wording in there if that was relevant for you. Another important trust deed clause to look at is around pensions, around member benefit payments, and the particular fund requirements for establishing, maintaining, and then changing pensions. Make sure that when you do look to start pensions in a fund, that it's done in accordance with your trustee. I'd go one step further and say, check your trustee to see what it requires or allows when it comes to pension payments. For instance, what's the required process to establish the pension? We know it's there. We make sure we follow it when we set up those pensions. Does the deed allow us to make changes to an existing pension, or do we need to stop it and restart? One of the ones which has become quite common nowadays is to add what we refer to as a reversionary beneficiary to a pension. Some trust deeds may allow that to happen without the need to stop, add that reversionary nomination, and then recommence a new pension. And whereas some older deeds might actually require you to do that before you make any changes to a pension, older trust deeds may require you to stop it and then restart. So again, just something to look at. The other one that you need to think about is pension payment frequency. Does your trust deed impose a required frequency for pension payments? Again, some older deeds may actually set out the pensions need to be paid weekly or monthly, whereas the super rules themselves allow pensions to be paid in any way agreed between the trustees and the member. So when you're looking at trust deeds, keep in mind those specific fund rules around pension payments. The same thing can be said around contributions. You need to think about what the trust deed specifics are around accepting super contributions. Now, we've always had contributions like employer or personal contributions, but over the years, the contribution rules change. We need to make sure that the trust deeds are written in a way that allow all of those eligible contributions. For instance, does your trust deed allow in specie contributions, contributions with assets rather than contributions of cash? Does the deed apply an upper age limit to the acceptance of contributions? You'll probably remember that a few years ago, in about 2017, the contribution rules were changed so that you could make personal contributions up to age 74 without the need to meet a work test. However, some of the older trust deeds are written in a way that require you to meet a work test if you're over 65. Well, that's no longer the legislation. So just again, check your trustee to make sure that it allows for contributions that you want to make and when you do want to make them. Okay, one of the sections that would arguably have the biggest and widest effect on members and probably the largest range of variations would be around the member death benefit rules. I would really strongly encourage you to look at the deed that you have when it talks about the death benefit rules. What are the types of death benefit payments that can be made? What are the types of death benefit nominations that you can make as a member of the fund, and what's required to establish that nomination? What I'm looking at here is your binding nominations, your non-binding nominations, your reversionary pension nominations. What's the required process under the trustee to get the outcome that you want? Think about binding death benefit nominations. In larger non-SMSF funds, they have a 3-year expiry date, but that same 3-year rule doesn't necessarily apply to self-managed funds. I could have a binding death benefit nomination in an SMSF that goes well beyond 3 years. However, if my trust deed requires it to be refreshed or lapse after 3 years, well, of course, that is a fund-specific rule that we need to deal with. So what we're looking for there is making sure that the wording of our agreement is in line with our trust deed. Another important clause is around what happens if part of a death benefit nomination becomes invalid. Does it render the whole death benefit nomination invalid? It could be that you've nominated a specific person as one of multiple recipients of your death benefits. What if that person or one of those people predeceases you? Does it make the entire nomination invalid, or does it only render that part of the nomination invalid, allowing us to deal with the benefits to the remaining beneficiaries? They're the sorts of clauses that can catch us. So we just need to make sure that we look at what is allowed when it comes to the validity of those death benefit nominations. One of the clauses I'd encourage you to think about, if it's relevant for you, is the need to have your legal personal representative appointed as a trustee in your place before your death benefits can be paid. So if I was to pass away, having that clause just means that my legal personal representative has to come in and has to be able to make decisions on my behalf before any of my money can be paid out of the fund. It's just a safety mechanism. The last section that I'd suggest you look at is around the rules to replace a deceased member. So what are the fund-specific rules? Does the deed allow the deceased members' LPR to act for them? What process is required for that LPR to act for the deceased? Who needs to sign off on it? Do all remaining trustees or directors need to sign off on it, or is it just the majority? And what powers does the LPR have when they're acting for that deceased member? So when it comes to acting for, replacing deceased members, make sure you check the trust deed wording and you're happy with that trust deed wording.
SuperGuide members have access to an extended version of this guide, including what to consider with trust deed updates and some tips that could save you hundreds of dollars. SuperGuide is the super toolkit for your SMSF. Join today to learn SMSF investing strategies and navigate complex SMSF compliance rules.